Do I have an original thought in my head about movies? Who said I have to be original? Why do we place such value on originality? This will all be swept away the next time I go to see a movie. Why do I watch so many movies? Is it insatiable curiosity? The resemblance of movie theaters to Plato's cave? Or perhaps the womb? Why even get philosophical about it? Maybe it's just my brain chemistry, and there's nothing deeper to understand. Maybe these are thoughts to air on the podcast. How many listeners do we have now? Who's sticking from one download to the next? Have I taken enough notes for this episode? Am I leaving myself enough time to prep for the next one? Where is the line between work and fun? Is there one? And what about Letterboxd? When will I ever get it up to date? Is the whole point of me watching so many movies just to see how high my Letterboxd stats can get? I know I won't answer any of these questions soon, and I'll just keep watching more movies. Nothing's about to change.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast, where we explore our shared love for watching and discussing movies recorded in the late after-work hours, often in lieu of a good night's rest. I'm Madeline.
I'm Emilio.
And I'm Julian. The three of us are colleagues at a Midtown Manhattan music school. Yes, music is what brings us together, but movies are what keep us together, talking at the end of the night, or in cases like this one, sometimes at different times of day. But it all comes from the ends of nights. So we've created some order to this ongoing trend by recording these conversations, considering an overarching theme, while we cycle through 5 unique guidelines for engagement.
You can email us at sleeplesscinematicpod@gmail.com. Seriously, we would love to hear from you. You can also follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok for updates, highlights, clips, and other visual supplements to the audio we record at the handle Sleepless Cinematic Pod. And subscribe to our monthly newsletter at sleeplesscinematicpod.substack.com to get even more insights, recapped thoughts, and musings about our conversations and other related Sleepless Cinematic goings-on.
In addition to these main episodes, we also record and release bonus one-off episodes as we see fit. And while we do this, you, the listener, can count on the three of us doing what we've grown to love, foregoing sleep, for a discussion about movies every other week.
And this week, we begin a new cycle of films focusing on Twins and Doppelgangers with a category we call View-nanimous, where we revisit a movie the three of us, or four of us, have all seen before and see if our initial opinions still stand, if they've changed, or if discussing the movie will make us see things we didn't see before.
And we're kicking things off with 2002's Adaptation, the second collaboration between director Spike Jonze and writer Charlie Kaufman, after the success of Being John Malkovich a few years before. This extremely self-reflexive film stars Nicolas Cage as both Charlie Kaufman and his twin Donald Kaufman. Yes, the writer of this film, an actual adaptation of the actual novel The Orchid Thief by Susan Orlean, is the main character. Orlean is played by Meryl Streep. Her subject in the novel she wrote, John LaRoche, is played by Chris Cooper in an Oscar-winning turn, and the film features other performances from Brian Cox, Tilda Swinton, Ron Livingston, and a couple of other cameos in the mix.
Yes, and in order to discuss a movie that is all about the process of writing, it was only fitting that we should contact and eventually have as our guest a writer. We've had her on twice before to discuss the films Saltburn and The Man Who Fell to Earth. And now she enters our small but growing category of guests who have recorded with us 3 times. She and I met about a decade ago at our undergrad alma mater, Sarah Lawrence College, and we've been great friends ever since. In the year since we last had her on as well, she has experienced a major milestone in her literary career with the publication of her inaugural collection of poetry, written under her pen name Leatrice, entitled Yearbook Signing. Another detail that makes her a fitting guest to discuss a film featuring a dual role is that she has quite a bit of experience performing under separate personas, specifically in the drag world under the names Gillette Blade and Fuckboy Jeff, despite the fact that I've just mentioned 3 different names you might know her by. For this conversation, we'll stick to calling her by the name we all knew first. Michaela Brady, welcome back to the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast.
Welcome
back. Great to have you back.
I'm so happy to be here to talk about this movie.
and by saying that you're here, I mean, listeners, it doesn't matter so much to you, but last 2 times you were with us, you were in the studio in person with us, and now we are having a call overseas. You're in your native home in Oxford, the UK. And, we're all in our New York, New Jersey abodes, but we're still having this conversation because we all love movies.
I mean, I wouldn't say native. I'm from New York City, but and given the Knicks win recently, I kind of wish I was still living in Maspeth, because that would be awesome if I were in the city at the moment. It looks so fun. But I'm here in Oxford, which is equally as lovely and fun.
Yeah. Well, this is a great point. Thank you for making that correction. Yeah, it's when we were during the intro talking about Midtown Manhattan Music School, I was very tempted to say the mostly pretty mobbed Midtown Manhattan these days, because we're recording this right after the Knicks won.
Go Knicks, man.
Spike Lee's probably having the best day of his life right now.
I think so too. We're recording, by the way, the day after the Knicks won in 5 games. So very exciting. I am a Bulls fan through and through, and the Knicks and the Bulls had quite the rivalry in the 90s, but I have been a New York resident now for over 20 years, and so it is a happy day for many people that I know, and for that reason I'm excited for their win. Very, very fun stuff.
And we were recording during one of the during I think game 1 potentially. We could hear the cheering and the sirens from outside of the place we normally record, which is near Madison Square Garden, although they were not playing there that particular day. I think it's fun that this has now kind of come full circle, that we were recording during game 1 and now we're recording right after game 5 after they've taken it. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, needless to say, it's been an interesting time to work in that area of the city.
Definitely.
For better and for worse.
I'd say mostly worse. I'm still go Knicks. So glad they took it in 5, but it was incredibly stressful to be working near the Garden during all of that craziness.
Yeah, when the moment the victory happened last night, I was grateful to be in my neighborhood of Bushwick.
But I was also I'm so glad that they've taken it, and now we can celebrate and not have to deal with more stress being right there by the Garden for additional games. So this is awesome. Go Knicks.
Yes, I echo you on that. And I'm guessing that, Michaela, it's probably not quite as rampant in the UK right now.
No, but everyone is saying my
Cup, right?
Muslim, my bagel's Jewish, my Christian Dior, Nixon 4. Everyone knows what the reference is.
Interesting.
People are asking me to explain basketball, and my coworkers from Boston,
they're like, "You're American."
Basketball, and I mean, to be fair, I understand basketball better than I understand baseball. But my coworkers from Boston, and when people are like, "Oh, do you fight?" I'm like, "No, we just don't talk about sports." And so we haven't mentioned. We haven't mentioned anything. I'm sure she wouldn't care, but it's it is how it is. People are aware that New York is erupting once again, and everyone is like, man, maybe I should just move to New York City. It sounds like life is great there at the moment.
Well, it wasn't so great for 53 years if you're a Knicks fan, so it was a long time coming, I think.
Yeah.
But a great day, as we said at the top, for someone like Spike Lee, who was around and reveled in those moments as a young person and wanted very much to be able to relive them later in his life.
I love this for him, because I was looking up how old was Spike Lee the last time they won a championship? I think he was 16.
17, something like that.
16 or 17. So I love that, as you said, he could enjoy it as a young man, and now he can enjoy it as a full adult who's been with this team for his entire life. I love that for him.
Yes.
Doing our best to talk about the Knicks from a perspective of film at this point. We've not talked about Timothy Chalamet or Ben Stiller. Larry David.
It seems
like
there's rumors of Ben Stiller is there on Celebrity Row filming a documentary about this win, is what they're saying. So we'll see if that comes to fruition.
Yeah. One of those games I saw Josh Safdie right there next to Timothy Chalamet.
Oh yeah, he was there yesterday too. Yeah.
Of course he was. But we made reference to a Spike who is not the Spike who directed the film that we are discussing today.
This is true.
And we should clarify before we discuss Adaptation, with its, despite the specificity of this movie, it's a pretty broad title. And there are a few other categories that could be cause for confusion. Like, if we're talking about movies that have a prominent motif of flowers, but also concern characters with a perceived duality to them, and maybe people of different social echelons or of different sort of social class who are brought together in a very strange, manipulative way. Adaptation is not to be confused with Bugonia.
Oh, yeah?
They don't sound alike, but there are a few different things about them that I think kind of correlate. And so, yeah, Adaptation is not to be confused with Bugonia or any of the adaptations that, Bugonia, which itself is an adaptation.
Yeah. When
That's
you were
true.
setting this up and your reasoning, I thought you were going to go Phantom Thread, even though it's not flowers, it's still like plant life
Right.
in some
Has
ways.
That's
an
true.
important role in that film. Yeah.
Yeah.
I also just was reminded of a conversation that happens between Charlie and Donald in this movie about films that start with flowers.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Absolutely.
There's a little bit of that
flowers
going on
for
too.
Algernon, not a
Algernon,
film,
yeah.
but still.
Yep.
Actually, I think there is
I think
a
it was a
TV
film.
movie.
Yeah, there is a
Yeah,
film.
there
I
was a-
watched it in middle school.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then
Well,
there's
this is not bad.
flowers in the attic.
Well,
I
but
think, too.
according to Charlie Kaufman, the character, not a film.
There we go.
Yeah.
At
There we
least
go.
at the point this came out.
Matthew Modine, who starred in it, might be a little offended by that, but
Sorry.
I don't know. He seems like a nice guy. Maybe he would take the joke. But yes, none of those things are the adaptation we're discussing.
And though they came out pretty close in time to one another, Adaptation is not to be confused with Evolution.
Hey, I had that one up too. I'll let you do it though.
Okay, well, we can take turns. Which is the 2001 sci-fi comedy featuring David Duchovny, Julianne Moore, Sean William Scott, Orlando Jones, and many others.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a lot because adaptation has multiple meanings in the film. Adaptation, you're adapting a work, but also adaptation of life. And so
Yes.
they conflate adaptation and evolution a lot in this film when it comes to the definitions of these two words and how they affect people and plants and life. So yes, adaptation not to be confused with Ivan Reitman's Evolution.
Yeah, couldn't have said
I
it
still
better.
need to see that.
I haven't.
You don't have to go out of your way to see it, is what I'm going to say.
No,
I
there's
don't
a
plan on
bit. I was like kind of into it, and then the Emilio, I think you know what I'm talking about. There's the bit at the end ish, and it just kind of ruined it all for me. But
Is this the like Head and Shoulders, the way they pump this thing full of stuff?
And then it, and
Or
then
is
all
it something
comes-
else?
It's when like stuff comes out.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I was a huge X-Files fan. My sister and I both big X-Files fans. So David Duchovny in a movie playing like a scientist, just inject it right into our veins. A little bit of a letdown, not gonna lie, but that's okay. Still, it's there to be confused with Adaptation, so don't confuse it with Adaptation.
Definitely.
I'm gonna sit this one out. Actually, I put more effort into the unlikely shared universe than I did this. So sorry.
Okay. Totally
That's
fine.
fair.
I've got one more I could do. Considering that we're about to discuss a movie featuring Nicolas Cage as, at least in one of his two roles, a character who is burdened by the inability to put his skills as a writer into action. Adaptation is also not to be confused with the unbearable weight of massive talent.
Right.
Which, titles don't sound so similar, but I think because it's Nicolas Cage playing a version of a real person,
Yeah,
definitely some room for confusion there.
absolutely.
Did anyone else see that movie?
No.
Yes,
I've heard
No.
mixed things about it.
Same.
Oh, you
I
saw it,
had
Michaela?
fun. I had fun. I
Yeah.
went into it not expecting anything, and I had fun watching it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I knew I wasn't going to be blown away like I was with this movie, but I wouldn't say I was blown away with this, but like I was very impressed by this movie, and I went into that one being like, this looks ridiculous. Let's just go. I don't even know what to expect, and I just enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think that's the right expectation to have with that kind of movie.
Yeah, it was a sort of like not completely shut off your brain movie, but kind of how I describe like watching K-pop Demon Hunters, where like I'm paying attention, I'm invested, but I'm not here to like really ponder things. I'm
Yeah.
here to just
Yeah.
enjoy the ride.
Definitely. But yes, not to be confused with Adaptation.
So, Julian, what is adaptation about, if not about all these other things we've mentioned?
Well, if you've seen this movie, you know that simply saying what it's about, you could probably talk about 3 different strands independently and have a pretty full story there. But I'll try my best to bring them together. Screenwriter Charlie Kaufman faces a severe bout of writer's block as he works to adapt a nonfiction book called The Orchid Thief into a screenplay for a Hollywood production. A few years prior, Orchid Thief writer Susan Orlean found herself stuck in a similar rut, finding some kind of escape in following the happenings of Floridian horticulturist John LaRoche and his quest to track and preserve the rare species of ghost orchids in the Fakahatchee Strand State Preserve. As Charlie Kaufman's writerly hesitations mirror perceived shortcomings in his physical figure and social skills, particularly relating to women he finds attractive on the social front, none of these flaws seem to exist in his twin brother Donald, whose mind runs free with cinematic ideas and who seems to have no major faults on the social front, despite little ways that Charlie seems to look down at him intellectually. As time goes on, Susan Orlean finds herself attracted to John LaRoche and his unbridled devotion to plants despite the tragedy of his past. And Charlie Kaufman realizes he's underestimated Donald after Donald's seemingly free-spirited screenwriting leads to some real results in the form of his script for The Three. Charlie starts to overcome his writer's block when he realizes his creative process gives him the story he's been looking for all along, with some help from the curmudgeonly screenwriting teacher Robert McKee. And as the steps of research, writing, and promotion come together, Charlie and Donald find themselves face to face with another writer and the orchid-loving free spirit who has set this all in motion simply by following his passion.
Yeah. As you said, this is a weird movie to pin down.
Yeah.
That's a pretty good setup for this, though.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
And so this is our View-nanimous episode. So we've all seen it before. And I mean, usually we select these categories based on what the three of us co-hosts have seen or not seen. But true to form, everyone on this episode, including you, Michaela, has seen this movie before. And yeah, so like, what were our first impressions of it, and what do we think now of Adaptation?
Yeah, so I saw it first in 2021, and I was in a very different position as a writer back then. I was coming out of the pandemic. I was still trying to understand what like my voice was. I had a mental breakdown and finished a novel and was like, what do I do now? And I was sort of in this mentality. I mean, to be clear, the novel hasn't been published. The poetry collection is the only thing I've put out in the world, and then like some things in magazines. But yeah, I think I was really empathetic with the character of Charlie and very irritated by the character of Donald. And I kind of loved, by the end of the film, it makes you not be so irritated by Donald. Like, Kaufman's just very good at immersing you in his neuroses. And as a very neurotic person, I like that a lot. And yeah, I think this is the most meta I've seen Kaufman be. And after seeing something like Synecdoche, New York, which I knew came later, but is so pessimistic about the creative process, this is kind of in between, where it's like, I can't do it, but the act of doing is better than doing nothing. And you can see this drive to create something and the drive to be different. So I felt very inspired and like I related to it. And now I watch it and it's kind of like a reinforcement of those feelings. But now that I've had to deal with the publishing industry a bit, I feel a little bit like, oh God, how do you actually get an original idea through? Like, it's so hard. Like back then I was like, I'll find a way. This movie is a little pessimistic. Like, he's older and he's down on himself. I'll find a way. And now I'm a bit like, damn, this thing is not friendly to people who are unknown. So I sort of feel like I've watched it at a good point for myself artistically, because it's like a keep going, but just be warned, it's not easy.
Yeah. So I first saw this when it was a new release. It had just come out in video stores. My parents rented it. We all watched it together. My parents were so confused. This was not their movie. I'm just going to say that. I liked it a lot more than they did, but I also remember being like, I don't know what the hell I just saw, but I was really transfixed by the world that this movie created. And so I saw it again probably about a year and a half after, and just was like, this movie is onto something really special. And I loved how immersive it was. You know, the movie is all about this strive for originality. And at the time, I felt this movie thread the needle and really found something so unique And so yeah, so I love that movie. I think I saw it at least another couple times as a teenager. I realized I don't think I've seen this movie probably since I was a teenager.
Wow.
So coming back to it was actually really interesting, and I was trying to think to myself what past film I had this type of relationship with. And the closest one that I would come to is Booksmart, which is that I remember seeing Booksmart and just being totally blown away by it. And then I watched it again and was like, I am not as moved by this movie as I once was.
Oh, wow.
And not in a bad way. There are a lot of things I still think are really good about this movie. So I think you're going to hear me mention a couple of things that don't land nearly as well for me now that I'm a little older, but things that I still think are like kind of miraculous and wonderful about this. So I kind of see both sides, I think, now of it a little bit more.
That's so interesting because I didn't see this until I was an adult. I saw this for the first time during the pandemic. But I could see, somebody as a teenager seeing this and being like, wow, I've never seen anything like this, and it being very affecting to them. It's interesting that maybe has dissolved slightly for you over time. Because I saw this as an adult and still felt that excitement that I think maybe you felt as a teen, where I'm like, I've never seen any movie like this, like the blending of fiction and reality. Like, this is the most meta movie maybe to ever exist. Like, he's narrating, like, he throughout the film is either talking into his tape recorder, telling you things that have already happened in the film or going to happen in the film or actively happening in the film. And I guess I could see that maybe being grating for some people, but I love it. Like, I think this is a fantastic movie. I loved it when I watched it for the first time, 5 or 6 years ago. I loved rewatching it for this. Dougie rewatched it with me, and he was like, I think this might be the funniest movie of all time. Like, I think the humor in it is so snappy and clever.
No,
and obviously that's something that Kaufman is very good at. I have like my relationship with Kaufman is all over the place a little bit. Like, I really dislike Anomalisa. Like, I can't. I'm not somebody that has like super strong negative opinions about movies oftentimes, because I like want to appreciate the art and like what a movie is going for. But there's something about the act of watching Anomalisa that like puts a pit in my stomach. Like, I really do not like that film. Whereas I watch this and I'm like, I think this might be the best movie ever made. So your mileage varies on screenwriters and directors, and definitely Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah. And well, I mean, all of these thoughts are very interesting to hear, and it's a little tough to know how to begin my follow-up. But I land in a similar place to you, Madeline and Michaela, where I think, yeah, this is a really charming movie. Watching it for this recording, it was my third time seeing it overall. And I love it more each time. The first time I saw this was, I'm sensing a trend here. The first time I saw this was in 2021 as well. Mm-hmm. I want to say it was like July 17th or 18th that year. My reason for wanting to watch it, I mean, it was no more complicated than it was on a streaming service that I had at the time. It may have been Amazon Prime or something, and it was going to expire. So I thought, okay, well, I like the other Charlie Kaufman movies I've seen. I've been meaning to get to this for some time. Let's do it. At that point in time, I had already seen, I like to tell this story that the first Charlie Kaufman movie I ever saw was Synecdoche, New York. And I saw it in high school when I was 17. So it was like, I really went in the deep end right away. And I should mention too, this was not my selection. It was in an English class I was in at the time. So if you want to know just how, for lack of better terms, severe things could be in my high school experience, I watched Synecdoche, New York in an English class. And I think that the second, yeah, and that's Charlie Kaufman's first film as director, but the second film where he had not directed, but written the screenplay that I saw was Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind a few years later. And I was pretty relieved seeing that, knowing that, like, yes, there's a lot of fraught emotion in that movie too, but it's a more optimistic movie by a long shot than Synecdoche is. Then the third one I saw was about a year after that, being John Malkovich, which we've had a mini discussion about in our Criterion Disc Holiday Share episode. That's about 6 months back in our feed now. Listeners, check it out if you haven't already. And, I said it there, but I think that's, for the most part, a really enjoyable movie, especially seeing the combination of Spike Jonze and Charlie Kaufman's sensibilities. I was definitely primed to think Adaptation is going to be a great one. And I think it is, and it affects me in an interesting way because Adaptation, it's like, I think it is a very funny, snappy movie, but there's something about the humor of it. It's where I feel like I don't guffaw when I see some of these jokes, but I still find them really, really funny.
It's a very funny film. It really is.
There's a very particular sensibility, a very particular tone it strikes. And I think that because there's something so like plain spoken and even keeled about it, but there are all these different layers of irony mixed into that. I've understood, like from the first viewing onward, that I was not going to pick it all up the first time. The second time I saw it was about a year and a half ago at the Film Forum as part of a series commemorating the 100th anniversary of The New Yorker. And that screening featured a Zoom intro from the real Susan Orlean, who I think just described being kind of confused when she heard about the production of this film, but ultimately really appreciating what it's brought to the world in its very strange, quirky way. And even then, with that viewing, I think I understood I'm still not going to get it all the second time. Third time around, I think I get much more of it. Not like I didn't understand it at all, but just tracing all the different little details throughout. And I still am not going to claim that I've uncovered every stone in it. But I do feel confident enough to talk about it as we do.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up Being John Malkovich, and you guys know that I had not seen that movie before our Criterion share, because that's the whole point of our share, is that we get each other a movie we haven't seen before. So it's interesting to me to rewatch this movie now, having seen Being John Malkovich, because I saw this movie first and had not seen that. So I'm able to appreciate those parts of the story a little bit more. It's not like a major element of this film. I think you can absolutely still watch this and enjoy it without having seen Being John Malkovich, but I think it gives you a little extra appreciation if you actually have seen it.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would agree.
So at the beginning of the film, when Charlie meets Tilda Swinton's character, who is also based on a real person, she's based on, I believe, an agent or like a producer, which gets weird when he imagines having sex with her, but that's beside the point. He's meeting with her.
I absolutely
happen a couple
too.
times.
I'm glad you said that because I wrote that down.
Yeah. So she meets up with him for lunch, and basically he's like, I'll take this script on, I'll adapt this book. She's the one that's optioning Susan Orlean's book, The Orchid Thief. And he says, I don't want this to turn into an orchid heist movie. You know, I want to keep it authentic and original. I just want it to be a movie without a clear beginning, middle, and end. I just want it to be about life. And in my head, I was like, okay, come through socialist realism. No, not socialist realism. There was the socialist film movement, which was just like films like Earth, where it's like fields and a woman sitting on a porch and more fields. And it was really well made, like movies, but it was just about life. There was not really a plot. And I'm like, Are you just trying to do that? And it's a tension that we see throughout the film of authenticity versus marketability and the structure that formulaic storytelling provides over unhampered creativity. So as fellow artists, what do we all make of this dilemma? And does industry and the forces of capitalism behind it drive formulaic stories, or do we naturally tend towards these defined plot arcs and certain genres? I have my answer, but you all should say yours first.
I mean, with Charlie as a character, it's difficult because this man is not well. Like, this man is struggling.
Yeah.
Like, he says he wants to write about life, and in life, nothing happens, and people don't change, people don't evolve, and that's just not true. Like, the problem is that he's viewing life through his depression and anxieties. Exactly. Yeah. Like, he thinks people can't change in life, and thus shouldn't change in this movie he's writing because he himself is stagnant. And authenticity is important to him, and that's great, but he can't stay authentic to himself because he doesn't know himself right now. So I feel like
he's not happy with himself.
Exactly.
Right now. Yeah.
And when he's saying like, oh, I don't want to turn it into a movie about drug running, I don't want to cram in sex or guns or car chases. Like, obviously the funny thing is that all of these things eventually get added into the movie. But he also says like, I don't want to cram in characters learning profound life lessons or growing or coming to like each other or overcoming obstacles to succeed in the end. Like, and again, a lot of this a lot of these things get shoehorned into the movie in a way that is very funny. But there's also like, while he's having this conversation with this producer, with Tilda Swinton's producer, you see him like sinking more and more into himself. Like he gets to a point where he's ignoring her entirely and is just completely spiraling in his own mind. And so I think that adds like an extra layer to this, because it's not only about like authenticity and originality versus being mainstream. It's also like his own anxieties and like what he's going through are informing like what he's able to put on the page.
Yeah, I can't forget the image of all those beads of sweat on Nicolas Cage's forehead in that conversation.
Yeah.
And I think in considering this question, I can't separate my knowledge of Charlie Kaufman's career preceding the film from the film itself, because because of course I did. I listened to Charlie Kaufman's conversation with Mark Maron on WTF, which is actually an episode I hadn't listened to before, and despite how much I listened to that podcast. And it's an interesting one because like Charlie Kaufman, and this is also, it's contemporary with Anomalisa, so like part of the conversation's Charlie Kaufman alone, the other half has Duke Johnson, the co-director of Anomalisa. And it's interesting because I think Charlie Kaufman is one of those figures that we watch his movies and we expect that he is going to be an enigma. But I mean, a little bit like Paul Thomas Anderson's appearance on the same podcast, that it's pretty disarming, and that he's very plain spoken about some ideas you would expect to come from a pretty lofty place. And I mean, there's probably more than a little bit of coyness on Charlie Kaufman's part. I would certainly not put that past him. But what stuck out to me was that he's talking quite a bit in that conversation about the numerous attempts he made to get his career started before things really started happening. Because like Being John Malkovich, that movie comes out when Charlie Kaufman is about 40. And that he, like, from an early age, he went to NYU film school, and he had wanted to be an actor and a director very early on, and was always enamored with movies. And then, in that interview, he says that having gotten to direct at that point, he loves the process because it takes him out of his own head. But then he also described many ups and downs of like odd jobs throughout the years, and like forays into the entertainment industry where he had like had a comedy pilot that was like on the edge of taking off at a certain point, and like screenplays that were, I think, being considered but not actually coming to fruition. And then he wrote Being John Malkovich for himself. Eventually it found its way to Spike Jonze, and it clicked with him, and one thing led to another. And then when you consider all those details in relation to what we see in Adaptation, I feel like it's a part of the really funny impression that Adaptation creates is that it's, some things about it feel like realism, but innately it's not. I mean, we know that there's only one Nicolas Cage, but it's, almost like there are moments of it that feel like almost on the level of Richard Linklater and how much they borrow from real life, but then like so fantastical at other points, or if not fantastical, just really movie-ified, that it really cannot be the same. Like, the Linklater comparison falls apart there. And but I think
I definitely want to get back to that what you're getting at right now. I think
okay,
it's
cool.
An interesting point, but keep
Thanks,
going.
Yeah. But then in thinking about how Charlie Kaufman conceives of the nature of his work in relation to the industry, I think that he can't help but be informed by years of ups and downs in that industry at that point. And so I think, Adaptation, some of it is just purely confessional, some of it is satire. It's really incredible how present all of those sensibilities are at kind of any given moment of this movie. So I think where I land on it is that in terms of the career interpretation element of it, it's like, not completely confessional, but mostly a synthesis of different things he's just learned by that point in his screenwriting life. And it just it's a very natural outcome of them, or an adaptation, we should say.
Right. I also would come back a little bit. there was a part of your question, Michaela, that talked about formulaic stories. Do we naturally like things like that and genres to help just kind of make sense of things? And it reminds me of two quotes in this movie. There's a really great quote about when you get passionate about something, what it does is it whittles the world down to something smaller, which is a quote that I remember even as a teenager. That spoke to me on a really deep level. And then the other thing is just kind of this general thing about when you are passionate about something, like you're not what loves you. You are what you love, which is funny. I talked to Madeline about this quote about don't do what you're passionate about, do what you're talented at, which is completely the opposite of what this movie seems to be arguing. Again, maybe it comes up a little bit against some of the things that feel different to me about this film now that I'm older.
There's also the perspective of someone like Kaufman, who's an artist, showing how he feels about this. Obviously, like do what you're passionate about because it worked out for him, but there's the other side of it, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the weird things that happens in this movie is that Charlie is reminded that he actually loves movies.
Yeah.
And that it's not something that you're supposed to run away from in an attempt to be original or to bring like a unique spin to something. And that's a journey that a lot of artists go on, which is like what brought you to the party, what got you so excited about something is oftentimes something that is exceptional in spite of how unoriginal it might be. And where it resonated the most for me is in how the end is actually more about falling back in love with movies. And what that means is it's okay to dabble in this.
There's also the fact that he says to his agent, Marty Bowen, played by Ron Livingston, that he doesn't want to write a wacky story this time. So it's not just that he wants to stay original and authentic. He also wants to kind of show the industry that he can do something a little different. Like, because this is only his second feature film. So he's trying to not be boxed into, I'm like the wacky story guy from being John Malkovich.
And he's adapting something. Like that is huge about this.
Yeah. He's like, I have a responsibility to another artist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can I give my answer to my own question?
100%.
So
yeah,
I very much resonated with his desire to be not like other girls, where he's basically like, I need to do something different. The industry is all crime and heists and love, and I want to just do something real. And I think you're right, Emilio, and actually all of you, like you touched on this, that like, yes, he's mentally ill, and that's where a lot of his creative genius comes from, is that like unashamed depiction of mental illness and neuroses and what comes from that. And it's sort of how relatable and sincere it is. But then he's then borne down by the weight of that sincerity and is now like, well, shit, now I don't know what to do with it. There's this celebration of unbridled creativity where it's like, I could literally do anything with this. But then he's also limited by the fact that he wants to be highbrow and intellectual. And so you have, and we'll get into the question of Donald in a bit, but Donald is essentially this foil created to challenge Charlie's own creative self-destruction. And he's basically like, why don't you just take a class? Like, the formula's been written. Come on, I'm having so much fun learning how to write, and I don't have any talent, but like, I'm having fun. And Donald is essentially what I used to resent a lot about writing, was like all these people just like falling for the formula. But then I look back at the shit I wrote in college, and it was terrible because I was trying so hard to be different rather than just being myself. And so like, for example, the poetry collection I put out is like a lot of like heartbreak stories. And I would say it's not like as formulaic as like a Taylor Swift song, but there is like something to it about like how you fall in love, how you're hurt, how you process that, and then how you might unexpectedly reconnect with people over time. And I think that this is then distilled in the end of the bit of the film where Robert McKee finally is like, the fuck are you talking about? We always tell stories. Like, and this is something that has come up. I tutor in reading comprehension, and I've taught these kids like the plot mountain. And I'm like, am I just like spitting out industry jargon? And then I realized like, no, the Moth story nights exist for a reason. us sitting around at a pub telling an interesting story exists because we do have clearly delineated beginnings, middles, and ends. And in those beginnings, middles, and ends, there has to be a hook. There has to be a thing that makes you want to know what's going to happen at the end. And I'm just looking at my notes on this. Yeah, to claim like a film about struggle with no resolution is just events, is just, one would call it torture porn nowadays. Where it's just like, what do you give people if you're just showing like such pessimism? And you actually get that a bit with Synecdoche, New York, where it's just suffering on suffering on suffering. But he's a bit more deft in how he delivers Synecdoche, New York, whereas were Charlie in this film to try and write Synecdoche, New York, I think it would be awful. Yeah. And so my answer to the question is like, I think naturally we do tell stories. There are forces of capitalism that decide what is marketable, and that even a story that follows a plot arc will be deemed unmarketable in some ways. But I still think that you can't be so hard on yourself as an artist to create something completely new, because we always build upon what has come before us. I do agree with his resentment of the like marketization of the writing process. I don't like that, but I also think that you do get a lot of people who are now pretty good writers out of those courses, and maybe they started off as like not very good at it, but maybe they just needed the helping hand, and that's not necessarily a bad thing either.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and I think all of us having experience with teaching or tutoring, it's like you see people grow as artists. Art is not just something that you're born into, that you're good or bad at. Like it is a skill that can be built, and that doesn't erase, the authenticity of art to be able to build that skill. And writing is much like music in that. Like, the songs that somebody writes in their bedroom when they're 13, like might be great, or they can evolve over time as that person learns more about song structure and learns more about music theory, and also just gets to know themselves better and gets to know the world better. And I think writing is a lot like that. And there's also the fact that's like, is it originality just for the sake of originality, which I would argue is like
a huge
the
thing this movie
opposite
is
of originality.
Yes, yeah. I couldn't agree more. That like I think removing structure, removing theory, removing tradition from art is a way to become depressed if you are trying to create something, because it literally just it hamstrings you. And I think that this movie is about the realization of that.
Yeah. Since we've gotten onto this discussion, I've started thinking a lot about My Dinner with Andre and like the differing views that Wallace Shawn and Andre Gregory express in that conversation. That like Wallace Shawn at some points is making more of the case for like, well, I'm not cognizant of every bite of food that I eat, but I don't have to be. I can enjoy kind of going along this preconceived track of life. But Andre Gregory is maybe a little more like Charlie Kaufman here, and he's kind of thinking, well, I've achieved these things, and what more is there for me? And it's been a little while since I've seen that movie. I think it might actually be 2 years to the day since I last saw it, which in my defense, it was a memorable occasion when I saw it because the real Wallace Shawn was there afterward at Lincoln Center. It was a great night. But it's, it makes me think a lot of like the conversation or part of the conversation that they have in that movie. And that's also a case where, because it's a conversation, they don't really come to a definitive answer. They just kind of consider the differing views, and they both exist, maybe not in perfect harmony, but they coexist still. Sometimes I like to think that My Dinner with Andre, despite the difference in format, that movie might have been the first podcast.
It certainly plays that way.
Yeah,
yes.
Just because of the nature of the discussion. There's an understanding in adaptation of it, like a similar two sides to the coin, that like you cannot alone make one work that encompasses everything. That these things, there are these kind of dualities, to put it appropriately, that exist, and it's never all one or the other. There are like, it's a Venn diagram constantly. It kind of makes me think about something that came up when we talked about Blue Velvet too, that you have like these characters at times are virtuous, at times they're depraved. But to quote Christine McKenna, who is the co-writer of David Lynch's memoir autobiography book Room to Dream, nobody is all one thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm wearing my David Lynch shirt right now.
Oh, sweet.
Nice.
Bring him up.
Cool.
I was going to say something kind of about that duality, which is we basically have two different films. And this is something that my fiance picked up on the first time we watched it. But basically, and you guys probably picked this up too, it's not like a hidden thing. This film isn't exactly subtle. Halfway through the movie, Donald asks, "Hey, am I in the script?" Charlie decides to go to New York to meet Susan. He decides not to, but he does go to Robert McKee's screenwriting course and he checks it out. McKee yells at him and they go to the pub together and they have a chat. And McKee says,
"Wow, I'm in the
like
third
Charlie
act."
starts spiraling in voiceover. McKee says, "Stop that. That's a cheap trick." And then he says, "Save the film in the third act." We now are in,
Right.
if you like, because we have the luxury of doing this with streaming services, if you move your cursor, you are now in the third part of the act, or of the third act of the film. And guess who takes over the movie? Donald. He's the one that goes to talk to Susan. He's the one that is driving this "I think she's up to something" plot. He's the reason they go to Florida. And then he's the one that dies. And when he dies, the story dies. Like the story just kind of peters out. And I think that that's so good.
Yeah, totally. I think that there's the fact that he's at the McKee seminar, but also that's when Charlie also brings Donald to New York, and he finally shows him the script at this point. And then from then on, it's a thriller, which is Donald's genre.
Which is also really funny to me because the moment McKee says, "And God help you if you have narration in your story, it's lazy and there's no bloody use for it," or whatever. The narration ends until the very end when he's in the car and he's talking to himself. He says, "LaRoche would disapprove." You know what? It feels
and
right.
it's talking about how to end the movie at that point.
Right. And so and there literally isn't any more narration. But there is Donald. And Donald is his inner voice personified. Right?
Yeah.
He's embracing the fact that he is like manifesting this other version of himself. I mean, there's a whole read on this movie where like only 25% of it is actually happening the way that anybody else would be seeing it, except for Charlie. You know, that like all of his conversations with Donald and then pretty much everything that happens in the third act is a figment of his imagination, is what he's doing as part of the writing process to sort of get himself over the hump on things. And so I always find it really interesting too, to your point, the narration ends, but Donald doesn't. And Donald is the inner voice.
But also that, like, I mean, this in some ways, like part of why you can argue that Charlie Kaufman has written a perfect screenplay here is that like he has all this freedom to mess with narrative logic and get away with it. And like, it struck me on this rewatch that like after Donald dies, there is almost no time spent on a grieving period. And
in like kind of a jarring way, I think.
In a jarring way. No, but that's, I like that you put it that way, that it's jarring but then I realized this time it's like, well, Donald is not a real person. So this is kind of the film cleverly saying there is no real person to grieve here.
Yeah, it's like he has lunch with Amelia and she says like one comment, which is basically like, "How are you doing?" And he responds like, "Oh, I miss him." Like there's a little bit of like they're still playing into this universe, but then they just move on. She's like, "How's the script coming? Here's info about me going to Prague." And it's like, if this man actually did just experience this horrible tragedy of losing his twin brother, it would not be brushed over so cleanly. But because this movie is kind of playing with like, well, what is the reality? Do these two people actually exist? That Lunch makes a lot more sense if you look at it through that lens.
Can I add a little side point, which is at the opening credits, it says written by Charlie Kaufman and Donald Kaufman. And I, in my notes, was like, who is that? And then at the end of the movie, I was like, he doesn't exist. They just put him in the credits. Donald Kaufman is in the opening credits.
And he's not just in the opening credits. They are jointly nominated for the Oscar.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that it's just like how the Coen brothers always credit
bring him up.
Roderick Jaynes as the editor,
Yeah.
but it's really the two of them. And they said that if they ever won an Oscar for editing, that, I mean, he's no longer with us, but they were going to send up Albert Finney in like a fake mustache to accept the award.
I think that Charlie Kaufman probably should have won the Oscar for this. I've never seen The Pianist, but this is an excellent screenplay. But also, I would have really been curious about his acceptance speech.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Fittingly best
see-
adapted screenplay at that.
Yeah.
Did you see the BAFTA speech?
No.
I did not.
Meryl Streep went on stage with a speech Charlie had written, and he wrote it completely improvised about how he didn't know what to say in the speech because he felt the pressure of Meryl Streep saying his words.
That feels very
So,
Kaufman.
like, the most meta...
Yeah.
Literally just a
Keeping it
continuation of the meta
Yeah.
headspace that is adaptation. Yeah, Julian, earlier you were talking a little bit about the fact that a lot of these people exist in real life. And this is one of the things I forget about adaptation sometimes, is that it is an actual adaptation of an actual novel. And that, like Being John Malkovich, real people in the reality of the viewers of these films are actually central to the plot. And I know that there's a lot that we can say about Charlie Kaufman making his interiority such a part of this movie, but in regards to the actual people who are named, like Susan Orlean, John LaRoche, Robert McKee, I was wondering for you guys, like, just knowing that these are actual people, does it change your interpretation of the film and maybe some of its messaging or some of the like intentions behind the film? I also like wonder if this movie would feel any different if these were fictional characters instead. I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts.
Well, to that point of what if these were fictional characters, I don't know that I've unpacked it yet, but my gut response was I prefer that they're real people. I think it's a much more interesting story when you consider that. And I mean, because she gave an intro to a screening I saw, the only one I really have a sense of how to perceive in reality is Susan Orlean. And it's funny because I don't like individually have a sense of the real John LaRoche or the real Robert McKee. There's part of me that thinks like maybe I hope this is not the case. I hope he enjoyed the movie, but the real John LaRoche, maybe he like looks at Chris Cooper portraying him and feels a little bit like the real John Watchowitz does about Al Pacino playing him in Dog Day Afternoon, where there's a little bit of a like, fuck that guy, I'm the real person sort of energy. But offset by the fact that that John LaRoche, the character, keeps saying, oh, you're making a movie? Who's going to play me?
You're right.
And so that, and if that's true to the reality of John LaRoche, then maybe he was really thrilled to see that Chris Cooper not only played him, but won an Oscar for it.
Mhm.
And, again, I don't know the real Susan Orlean, but something about the person actually being a New Yorker staff writer, it leads me to think that she would understand all the levels of irony in this film and probably appreciate this portrayal. And, I'm going to like set this up to kind of pave way for some other responses here, but I think the part of the movie where I have to reckon with that difference from reality the most is the third act.
Of
Because
course.
this is where it's pure, in narrative terms, fantasy. And I would bet that some of these people watching that third act were like dually entertained and also just kind of, for lack of better term, struck by what they saw. Maybe they're just kind of like, oh, that's a pretty gruesome death, but I guess that's what fits the story.
Yeah, Susan Orlean, when speaking about her reaction to reading the screenplay, she said her first reaction was absolutely not. That, and I
kill
think
her career.
Yeah, I think that that's a fair reaction. And also the fact that Charlie Kaufman is not as known at this time. I don't think at the time she gets the screenplay that Being John Malkovich had been released yet. So I think that she still doesn't really have a sense of his style, and she's reading this and suddenly, like, I don't think she had any warning that she was suddenly a character in this film. But I think that perhaps the point, because she does say that she eventually comes to really appreciate Adaptation when she's interviewed about this about a decade after its release. But I definitely understand how a woman would initially read this and be like, I'm not a fan of this portrayal. There is like a sexualization element to both her and, as Michaela said earlier, like the producer played by Tilda Swinton that's like can be a little bit weird potentially to a certain extent.
Yeah, like she becomes addicted to this drug. And then is just like, well, now I have to go and kill this person. And she's having a relationship with her subject, which I also heard in an interview. She was very afraid that people were going to think that this was actually something that happened, and was relieved to find out that hardly anybody ever brought it up. And she's like, oh, that's very interesting. Like the aspects of the journalistic integrity and professionalism were not on anybody's mind necessarily when
because
they
this
saw
is
this
the
film.
whole that's the whole theme of the movie, right?
It's
like
fantasy,
you can't watch this movie and watch like particularly the first 2 acts and then go into the third act and be like, this is all based on reality. Like
Totally.
otherwise you have like terrible media literacy, and that's not a person whose opinion I would care about anyway.
Well, and I mean, going back to the whole idea of tropes and who is watching these films and what people are going to be able to digest and understand. I mean, I do think that there is an element of that in play, which is like, is the average viewer going to be fully along on this ride to the point where they get to this moment in the film and they realize that this isn't really happening, that this is a construction of somebody who's trying desperately to figure out how to do their work.
In the moment, I completely would give somebody a pass for while watching this actively being like, I'm still not sure of the sense of reality. But if it gets to a point of finishing the film and sitting with it and then associating the real life people with the reality of this film, then that's where I'm like, okay, people would need to chill out should it go this far.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll say too, I feel like the act of bringing real people into this story feels kind of like a provocation. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I think if everybody but Charlie was somebody else with a different name or whatever, or people based on actual people, I don't think how Kaufman is trying to play with the viewer works as well. I think he's actively trying to upend the idea of what is real and what isn't, and the way that we perceive things, and in the pursuit of interesting stories, like where do we allow our brain to go? And so I think it has to be real people to work the way it does.
There's also the fact, I think, that with Susan Orlean, as far as I can tell, like Charlie Kaufman, the real life screenwriter, had no interaction with Susan Orlean. So this is a fictional character in that he's not able to base her on anything outside of what he learns of her from The Orchid Thief and like maybe from other writings of hers that he has read. Like everything has to be a creation of a person that he does not know. Same thing with LaRoche to a certain extent. Like there's a certain amount of background with these characters that has similarities with the real people, but there's also like a lot of fictionalization as well because he doesn't have personal relationships with these people. It's a little bit different than like how much of himself he's putting into Charlie Kaufman the character versus, how much of these people he's putting into characters that are based on people he doesn't know.
Sure.
And we have to remember that, well, technically the Charlie Kaufman movie before this one is called Human Nature, directed by Michel Gondry, which was not as widely seen or well received. But before that, we've got Being John Malkovich, which is another movie which, even up to its title, also deals with a real person. But the difference is that John Malkovich is an actor who moviegoers presumably know from other things. Whereas I would bet that many people who went to see Adaptation prior to watching it did not know about Susan Orlean or John LaRoche. So to those viewers, those people, as much as they are based on real people, they are as good as fictional characters.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a wiggle room that comes from that as well.
Right.
So if I can get a bit self-indulgent and navel-gazing for a sec, the poetry collection I put out, there are things in it about real people. And in the beginning, I put a disclaimer saying that even if these poems are based on real people, every person mentioned in this, whether pseudonymously or just through the sort of neutral, like you address, like they are fictional. They are recreated from memory, and therefore they cannot be the full person, especially the full person they are today. So yes, it was a bit of me wiggling out of people being mad at me, but it was also honest. Like, people have asked, like, are you worried that the poems, because the whole collection's about human relationships, and so people have been like, are you afraid of people reading these poems and being like creeped out? I think that's the other thing, like, about Susan Orlean's reaction is like, aren't you just a bit creeped out that this guy like is thinking of you
like
this
masturbating
much?
to you?
Yeah, and masturbating to the creative inspiration you're giving him. But I think that because now that I've done something, that involves real people to an extent, like, I have wondered, like, what it does to the story. And I agree, though, that with adaptation, the film wouldn't be as punchy if it weren't realistic, because it is a real struggle. It immerses you in the struggle of adapting a real work and feeling obliged to care about it. If this were all fiction, I'd just be like, oh, what a fun thought experiment. But this is literally happening. But it's still him trying to externalize a very internal process as well. And so there's always going to be a bit more fiction and dramatization in that. And if you'll indulge me for a quick sec, I did write some reflections about writing pieces about other people, and I mostly wrote it after watching Hamnet, but I'm going to read like a couple sentences from it. So I watched Hamnet, and then I wrote this right after the poetry collection was published. I've been feeling so guilty for writing poems about other people, publishing them, and wondering how they'd react to these reflections in print. And I say, like, I'm worried about driving this person away. I'm worried about driving that person away. And all these things may come to pass, but art has a way of turning us back to each other. It's the length of time between our union and reunion expressed in what we tell the world. And this is what drives empathy. Art has a way to draw us to each other, return us to our moments, but it's up to us to unlock that. Creation is both from the self and the world that made us, and the people and lives it contained. So if my art frightens the people I want to be connected to, all I can say is they should expect to be frightened. It's daunting to know you had a part in creating something both observed and felt by others, but how human it is to have impacted anyone and to love and to grieve that all together. Which gets a bit like dramatic, but
that's
I
great.
love that. I think,
Yeah.
it speaks to the classic, like, writers write what they know to a certain extent. That doesn't mean that's all that they can write, but, like, I think writers and artists, we pull from the people we know and the experiences that we've had and that people we know have had. And I think, it's all fair game in art.
mm-hmm,
Yeah. And if there
mm-hmm.
was, in the WTF interview, Charlie Kaufman even said that everything is autobiography to varying degrees. And I noted too in the end credits of Adaptation that there's a disclaimer. You often see the disclaimer at the end of a movie that, says this is fiction. I can't say it verbatim, but like, despite any perceived closeness to reality, this is all fiction. And Adaptation has an interesting one where it says, though this is based on a true story, there are many elements of fictionalization, which I've seen before, but not as often in movies. And to be frank, like, I have things that I want to write someday that I think I would want the same disclaimer on, because, like, you can't get something from nothing. We write what we know. And well, it makes me think also of a Nora Ephron quote, everything is copy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe now I don't know how we eloquently transition other than to say, are we ready for comparison corner?
Let's get into
100%.
it. Yes. Yeah. Does anybody want to start?
Well, I have one that jumped right to the front of my mind. I can't decide whether this is a hear me out comparison or if it's like this will be clear, but I'm just going to go for it. Watching Adaptation, there were quite a few elements that made me think of City Slickers. And that was specifically...
Yes. In fact, in my notes, I wrote, this reminds me of when Rob McClure talked about how dark the movie gets in the beginning and how light it ends up becoming later. I had those exact notes.
Amazing. Well, but like the fact that it's a movie about midlife crisis, but that more specifically, that part of the resolution of said midlife crisis for more than one character, by the way, that's another comparison. It's a journey into an unknown stateside region. And then there's a quote I think that John LaRoche has in the movie about finding your one thing. which is also a
That
big
too.
quote from Curly in City Slickers, and Jack Palance, who played Curly in City Slickers, and Chris Cooper for playing John LaRoche in Adaptation, both won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for
There we
playing
go.
that character. So maybe that's as close as they get, but some pretty striking similarities to City Slickers, I must say.
Yeah.
Yeah, at first, to me, this was going to be like I have to hear you out on this one. But no, I see this. Absolutely.
It jumped out to me in a huge way, actually. I was
Yeah.
like, boy, this movie sets up, it's so dark, just like City
Yeah.
Slickers. Very
And not
cool.
out of the question that Charlie Kaufman would have seen that movie at the time and responded to it. I don't know that he did, but certainly not impossible.
And again, I mean, that is a movie. You could take that script and teach it in a film seminar. It's really tight. It hits beat after beat after beat. There is something very formulaic about it, but it's a really good movie.
Yeah, it's very
is.
profound.
Totally.
It's a very good film. So yeah, I hear you.
Yeah. So I'll pass the baton now, but that's what I'm
Great
kicking it off
pick.
with.
I'm very on board with that.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, I could go in because mine's a little more surface level with just more absolute one-to-one comparisons. And, Dougie brought this up while we were watching it. He was like, well, I'm really glad that you've now seen Barton Fink. I'm like,
Yes.
these two movies are both about neurotic screenwriters that are approached by people in the Hollywood industry to write a film. Obviously, in Adaptation, it's adapting something. In Barton Fink, he's been hired by a production company. But the screenwriter wants to approach the material in a way that's more realistic, that's truer to real life. But they're hit with writer's block because how much of life have they really experienced, both of these writers? And they have to evade their contacts in the industry to hide the fact that they aren't making headway with this script at all. And then a character that the writer sees as kind of an everyman, working man type is introduced. Although in Adaptation, Charlie does not have any direct interaction with LaRoche, unlike in Barton Fink. But I want to keep this spoiler free for Barton Fink. But in each of these films, the everyman character ends up hiding something that will come out and will directly affect the main character.
Very cool.
Very good. In fact,
I thought of Barton Fink too.
I have a list on my Letterboxd that is just called Writer's Block. And it's Barton Fink, Adaptation, The Shining, 8.5, The Lost Weekend, and then this German movie from a few years ago called A Fire, directed by Christian Petzold. And I mean, that's, I'm sure there are more things that I will add to that list over time. But I think that's what I've seen so far of the pantheon of great depictions of writer's block. That and the SpongeBob episode where he has to write the essay. Some of these, some of these. Yeah. Yeah. Great one.
Thank you.
My comparison's a little crass. I was going for more of the, this is what the celebrity is actually like. And this is maybe a bit more a la Being John Malkovich, but there's lots of media out there of adapting a celebrity's personality or a figure's personality to the convenience of a plot. And off the top of my head, because obviously there's lots of celebrity cameos and things, This Is the End, which is, I think it's Judd Apatow. But the beginning of that movie is so good because it's all these actors and celebrities that you kind of know aren't great people, and you're actually seeing them at a big party together while the world is ending, and they're not getting saved because they're all horrible people. And I like the characters they make out of the real people they're trying to depict, that Jonah Hill is the innocent one that gets possessed by Satan and turns out he was just being a nice guy as a front the whole time. Michael Cera is actually a misogynist dick. It's all kind of tongue-in-cheek about these people might not actually be like that, but I enjoyed that for the sake of either the hyperbole. We don't know these people, so who knows how much of it is taking one personality trait of theirs and blowing it up for the big screen, and how much of it is them just being like, what if we made you the opposite of what you actually are? And I found that fun. And this is kind of in the same vein, a film where I'm thinking specifically about the scenes in Adaptation that are set with Being John Malkovich, where John Malkovich just starts directing everyone and he's being kind of a jerk. He's not outright being mean. He's just a bit of a control freak. And I'm like,
he's trying to stand up for all the other people who are in all the masks, right? Like
that's how I interpret it.
Yeah.
I do think it's important to point out that that's from a behind-the-scenes documentary about the making of being John Malkovich, and I think that makes it more interesting.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Because Kaufman he's able to take this actual behind-the-scenes footage of Malkovich, but kind of use it to his own ends and like edit it in a way that makes him like seem a certain way, and then is able to insert the character of Kaufman in a particular way. I think it still works, to your point.
Yeah. And then you also have this, it's not about Meryl Streep, but you have this actress that can basically play any role. Like, she's very versatile, right? We all know this. And for most of the film, she's really bland. Like, Meryl Streep, who can exude personality and do all these different characters, she's given nothing for the first half of the film, or the first 2/3 of the film. And then in the last bit, she finally has a personality and a character. And you almost start to project Meryl Streep onto Orlean rather than Susan Orlean herself, because we don't know who she is, but we know who Meryl Streep is. And you get into this like third level of the meta of adaptation, of these recognizable faces playing people that also are real, but we don't know who they are. And that reminded me a bit of like just any celebrity cameo episode of a TV show, or like a celebrity tribute episode where someone's mistaken as the real celebrity.
Well, that makes me think of Extras, the Ricky Gervais show.
That's the one I thought of too.
Yeah, or like every episode's around a different celebrity cameo. And like, well, actually, last time we had you on, Michaela, we talked about the David Bowie appearance on that very show, which is like one of David Bowie's great acting moments. Then I've also thought that the Ian McKellen episode is hysterical. Like, you know, when he's just like, not much theater work, huh? Okay, what I do is I pretend to be the person who I'm portraying. And then
I see you're confused.
Yeah. So Ian, wizard, you shall not pass. And also like, to bring up someone who came up earlier this conversation, Ben Stiller, he has an episode of Extras where that absolutely happens to him too. It's very much like, this guy's not who you think. But yeah, just all to your point, Michaela.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm going to go a little funky on this. Has anybody here seen The Dark Half?
No,
I'm not familiar with this.
Okay.
Yeah, never heard of it.
This is a film from 1993. It stars Timothy Hutton and a younger Aunt Gladys, Amy Madigan. I saw this movie in full probably when I was like 13 or 14. My sister's a big Stephen King fan. This is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, and it's directed and written by George A. Romero, famously of the Night of the Living Dead and all the other Dead movies too. But it's about a writer. Oddly enough, hey, Stephen King writing about writers, who'd have thought? But it's about a writer whose name is Thad, who, when he's a boy, they discovered that he had like subsumed his twin. And then his twin, there were like bits of his twin that were still inside of him. And so the doctors apparently removed the remnants of this twin. And then he grows up, he becomes a professional writer, but he only achieves meaningful success when he writes crime novels under a pseudonym named George Stark. And so he gets pushed into going public and to retire the George Stark name. But when he does, murders start happening, and it looks like he's responsible. And that's because the Stark character, George Stark, has actually manifested into a real person that is dead set on staying alive and kind of like replacing Thad as the actual writer. There's a ton of similarity about like the duality of art and commerce, the way that you can choose like darkness or lightness as a tone for what you write, like the all-consuming nature of creating art. It's also a dual role that Timothy Hutton plays. I rewatched part of this movie just for the ability to talk about it. It is not aged very well, I'm going to say. And I think some of the writing is not very good, oddly enough. I don't wholeheartedly recommend it, but I think it does pair well with adaptation when it comes to like writers and interiority and how the demands of the profession of writing actually might manifest another version of themselves in order to succeed.
Well, by extension, that sounds a lot like the John Carpenter movie from around the same time, In the Mouth of Madness.
I was just about to say that.
Yeah, definitely. I thought of that one too.
Speaking of actors who are great in dual roles, Sam Neill. Yeah. I haven't seen Event Horizon, but I've heard enough about it to understand that. But yeah, Sam Neill's great. I mean, we talked Possession about a year ago. Speaking of movies with Sam Neill and that have dual roles. So there we go. Cool. And that has been Comparison Corner.
So if you are a longtime listener of our podcast, you may have heard us speak to a past guest named Idris Goodwin. He was an artist mentor, and he's a very prolific writer, friend of mine, friend of the podcast. And during our last conversation with him, which was about a year ago, we ended, and this did not make the edit, but we had a conversation. Adaptation came up, and he was like, "Oh, guys, I don't like that movie." And we were like, "Oh my goodness, really?"
We were like, "What?"
Yes, really. I felt like this was a movie that would have really spoken to him. And so, in the spirit of what we do occasionally on this podcast, which is we'll sometimes reach out to past guests and see if there's any little thing they want to contribute, I asked Idris, I said, "Hey, man, would you be open to maybe expanding a little bit on those thoughts and telling us just a little bit more about maybe why this movie doesn't work for you, and if there's something that you'd like to just kind of share with the group?" So I'm going to go ahead and play that, and maybe there's a point or two that we might want to get into here. Here we go.
The movie Adaptation is trying to have it both ways, all the ways, and no way at all. Taking the meta route works well in sketch and short form. In long form, a full-length motion picture, you still have to have a story and characters that we connect with and root for. Charlie Kaufman's character is so self-deprecating. And even Don, his, I don't know which is it or which is ego, is supposed to be the more conventional, likable one, right? The version of him, that we believe in more, or something like that. It is about this screenwriter overthinking and trying to reject formulas and tropes. But meta has its own formulas and tropes as well, and pitfalls. And this movie falls into a lot of them, which is that it just leans on the meta-ness to get itself out of having to really take us on a compelling journey that's transcendent. Nothing in it feels particularly earned. It is so self-referential in the sense that if you weren't alive for the Being John Malkovich moment in 99, I don't know how you're going to really make sense of this. If I showed this to my soon-to-be 14-year-old and didn't show him Being John Malkovich, he's missing a key piece. And in that sense, it is of its time. And that's what I felt. I felt the formal push, what it's doing with form and everything was very of that moment. This kind of, neurotic, self-deprecating, struggling auteur kind of archetype was very of, the 90s, coming out of the Tarantino, Kevin Smith moment. So truth told, I liked it less now than I did back when it was new, and I didn't like it that much back then either. I just think it's a cop out. There's a lot of copping out in this movie, and I think it benefits from a great cast. This movie with lesser actors doesn't make as much noise, right? So anyway, I personally think it's one of the most overrated movies, next to Crash and La La Land and all that.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, Idris is an amazing writer, and I think has excellent perspective on these kinds of films. And I absolutely respect this opinion of his, but I also disagree on several things.
Mm-hmm.
I saw this movie before I saw Being John Malkovich. I was alive for Being John Malkovich, but I was too young to have seen it at the time. I'd say too young to have appreciated this movie had I seen it at the time. And I do think that, as I said up top, watching Adaptation first is probably if I could tell somebody that I think would like these movies the order to watch them in, I would say watch Being John Malkovich first. But I don't think it took that much away from my enjoyment of this film to see it without that piece. I don't know that it's that central of a piece to this movie, in my opinion.
Yeah, except for the point of having seen Adaptation first. I echo you completely, Madeline. Yeah, I think it's interesting because I get where Idris is coming from. I land in a different place in terms of sensibility, and I think that I couldn't perfectly rephrase it. He said something about change in the character, but I think something that I actually like about Adaptation is that you consider, like, I mean, there are a lot of changes throughout the story, but if you consider the arc of Charlie Kaufman, the character, he changes, but he is still the same person at the end as he was in the beginning. Like, there are like, I think he makes progress, but it's not exactly that he as a person changes. And it makes me think of a quote I remember reading, speaking of the New Yorker, in a New Yorker article about the Safdie brothers around when Uncut Gems came out, where I forget if it was Josh or Benny, but one of them, I want to say it was Benny, said that on the topic of characters changing in movies, that real people don't change. Why should they in movies? Something to that effect. It's more like, they're interested more in like how people go through situations and the situations around them change, but the characters, they believe that people don't and their characters don't either. And I've never been able to unhear that or unread that whenever I've seen a Safdie brothers movie since then. I absolutely see that in all of their films. And I think it's present here in Adaptation as well. But then, well, it's really interesting, like, because like with what Idris is saying about cop-outs, like I have had that same criticism about other movies. Like I definitely can, maybe if not to it about this movie, I can relate to it in general. There was a movie earlier this year called Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die, which was like, that got some pretty high critical praise. It got like it certified fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. I saw it and I did not like it at all. And I thought for a similar reason that it was just like full of cop-outs.
Yeah, I never got to that, but I remember you telling me at the time that you really did not care for it.
Yeah, and it was just a movie where it felt like a lot of, and maybe like I don't know if Idris sees the Adaptation exactly this way, but a lot of style, a lot of plot devices, and in my eyes, very little substance. And so it's interesting. Like I can relate to having that criticism, but I don't know. Maybe I just feel a resonance with Charlie Kaufman's being in a different way.
I think also like the storytelling side of this movie is interesting for reasons that we've already kind of gotten into. It kind of has these two mostly separate stories. And then in the third act, it tries to go a lot more conventional. But I think this movie obviously it's trying to comment about like writing structure and story structure and like what makes a good plot and what makes interesting characters. And I think this movie does that in the way that it plays with that structure. It also critiques it and says, like, is this completely necessary? And I think part of maybe what Idris is pushing up against is that for some people that is necessary. We were talking about like how true to certain story structure or character development traditionally does a movie or do characters need to be. And I think part of that is personal preference.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we definitely can't negate the element of personal preference or just the fact that like, some people, some writers, some actors click to you and others don't.
Yeah, it's interesting because I said at the top that I watched this again for the first time since I was probably 18 or 19, and that some things felt just as good as they've ever been. And then some things I think I was a little bit more critical of. I think I was a little bit more, as a younger person, open to the idea that I was seeing somebody struggle and that there wasn't this tidy resolution. This time, when I watched the movie, it felt a little messier than I remember it being, but in a way that made Charlie not as sympathetic, I think, as I felt when I was younger. And part of that was the fact that I felt like the movie didn't really have him figure out something meaningful about how to feel better. Like I feel like, and this is partly the direction of Spike Jonze, like I feel like the movie leaves you on this like really nice high, of him just being like, yeah, okay, I have peace, great. And then, he cuts to the time lapse photography of these, flowers going, back and forth and everything. But if you really listen to what's going on, this movie is not actually concerned with anything more than just how content and out of his depression and neuroses is Charlie Kaufman right now.
Yeah.
This time, it was the first time I was like, I think I want more. It's not meaningful enough for me to just know that for the next 3 minutes, he's going to feel okay.
Yeah. I feel like it's not something that can be solved by this movie.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to hop in and say that like, he got what he wanted in the end. He got a bit of a life lesson, but he still got the film that was authentic. He gets that little dig in at the end by being like, this isn't a completely happy ending. I'm just keeping on going. And that's not what he says, but I think that it really addresses something that's a bit more dialectical than just, and they all lived happily ever after, which I would say is a bit more formalistic. Mental health is never fully solved. Our lives are never fully solved. Our creativity is never fully satiated. And so I kind of didn't leave the film feeling like I got my happy ending. But I also know with Charlie Kaufman, he is trying to portray something a bit more authentic than that. And therefore he wants to have a bit of an authentic experience. And when the film is about him and his own creativity, then he can be like, all right, yeah, I played the game and I got my story. But I'm on a path for a moment, and I'm not a reliable narrator. I'm not a reliable person. So I don't think that that's necessarily an issue with the movie. If you leave feeling like you can't trust him to be on a better path, I think that's perfectly okay, because at least he's doing something. And for so much of the film, he spent thinking.
And the ending is messy because the last act is largely from Donald. The last act is a thriller. And then once he's gone, Charlie does not know how to tie it up, because he doesn't know how to write a conventional ending the way that Donald would. And I think the lunch we were talking about with Amelia earlier is like a very stumbly way of trying to do that in a way, again, to be clear, that I think is effective in the sense of the whole film. I think this is intentional.
Totally. Yeah. Well, and you've mentioned Donald briefly just now, but I think I have a little more that I want to say about him, and just the general fact that we came to this movie as part of a cycle that is about, at bare minimum, dual roles in film. And we have Nicolas Cage playing both Charlie and Donald very memorably. And so in considering that we have this kind of a role in adaptation, so we've already acknowledged abundantly that this film draws candidly from Charlie Kaufman's actual creative process. But of course, Charlie Kaufman makes the notable choice in giving himself a fictional twin brother. And so on top of the gimmick of having one actor play these twins, their relationship also has parallels to that of Susan Orlean and John LaRoche, who are not blood relatives. And so how do you interpret the presence of a fictional identical twin in this story on its own and in conjunction or contrast with the relationship between Orlean and LaRoche?
Like both with Orlean and LaRoche, and also with like the Kaufman twins, like one is able to be kind of a foil for the other, in that like Donald exists to personify personality traits that Charlie wishes he has. Like he's confident and he's carefree and he's outgoing and he's like good with women. And these are all character traits that Charlie himself wishes he had. Susan Orlean, on the other hand, like she looks at LaRoche and sees some similar things. Like he is passionate about something, like he wants something. And she says like, what she wants more than anything is to want something as much as people want these orchids and these plants. So I think that's like the main thing, is that these two both are like have somebody showing another person the aspirational qualities of that other person.
Absolutely. And I think that Well, Idris said something about ego and id too. And I think that my read on that in relation to these characters is that, so like Charlie is mostly all ego and Donald is id, and that Susan, as well as mostly all ego, and John LaRoche is id. You put it well, Madeline, that they're foils for one another. And there was a quote, not from the real writer Susan Orlean, but the character Susan Orlean that I wrote down that comes early on in the film in Robert McKee's forsaken format of voiceover, where she says, LaRoche loved orchids, but I came to believe he loved the difficulty and the fatality of getting them almost as much as he loved the orchids themselves. And, it speaks to the id element of him, but also that I think like what's really interesting about the Charlie Donald relationship to me is that there is like a Donald almost serves as a manifestation for, or maybe a pathway almost, to put it in more cynical terms, a deus ex machina towards the dangers of writing. And that like, when you consider, like we've acknowledged that Donald is really the driver of the third act of adaptation. And I kind of like, we did a cycle of episodes last year that about movies that were all about audience interrogation. And I sort of think of the third act of adaptation as authorial interrogation, where it's like what happens when the writer actually comes face to face with the subject. Like the distance of the written word is gone. You are there in the room with the person. What happens? And then these characters who we've taken maybe mostly to be good people throughout the movie, suddenly a dark side emerges in them and they realize, wait, this guy is stalking us, I think. And then Susan Orlean says, I think we have to kill him. They're reduced to a primal instinct there that is jarring, but in a way that it serves the story well and serves this greater point of authorial interrogation there. And that Donald as a character, well, also in the WTF interview that Charlie Kaufman was, speaking to why he chose to write himself as having a fictional twin. He put it pretty simply as that, like, seeing one writer going through the creative process in a screenplay is not that interesting. So I gave him a twin, just not even necessarily to personify any other thoughts, just to kind of give him more to do. And that he thought it would be funny if this twin just had back problems for some reason. Maybe that's a little more of that absurdism, so characteristic of being John Malkovich. And then I think this ego-id relationship develops between them in probably the process of writing it. But I think that in some ways, the decision to have Donald there doesn't have to be one that comes from a very profound preconception, but it's one that has many different ripples.
Yeah.
Totally.
You may be noticing a little bit of a trend here. I was a little bit more cynical about the Susan Orlean, John LaRoche element of it. To me, it just felt like because so much of that is perception on the part of Charlie, how could it not be that? Because Charlie is dealing with his own framework for duality here, that he has his own twin that is there to kind of reflect all these things in life that he feels like he doesn't have as much of a grasp on. So naturally, when he reads The Orchid Thief and he comes up against even a little bit of trouble thinking about how he might adapt it, he can't help but think of himself. I feel like I was more sympathetic of that when I was younger. I felt very Charlie Kaufman'd out by the end of this in a way that I think I've been in this guy's head too long. And I'm maybe not as invested in where he ends up, which is so weird for me because I was ready to just rave about this movie. And I still love it in a lot of ways. I still love what it does. I think it's formally extremely creative and fun. But I think the subject, I don't know if I'm totally along for the ride with him as much as I thought I would be. But that's okay.
You feel after a Woody Allen film too. You're like, okay, get me out.
I feel the same, actually. I have the same issues with Woody Allen, which is the movies where crimes and misdemeanors and stuff, I think is really strong. Those parts of that movie are the weakest parts of it for me.
Interesting.
Like I said, like it's another film about neuroses, and it's like I get it, I relate to it. I know I am also from New York and a writer. I can't be around this for too long.
Yeah. These are, but these are all both filmmakers who like like if you're gonna like see one movie and then see another, you kind of have to know what you're signing up for. Like you don't get lightweight versions of either of them.
Yeah.
No.
For better or for worse. But this also is like, as much as Charlie Kaufman's already in middle age when he makes this, that I kind of look at there as being like two phases of his screenwriting career, where like being John Malkovich, Adaptation, Eternal Sunshine, like a lot of different emotions in each of those, but there are more optimistic bents to them.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
then like Synecdoche onward, it's much more grim. And to be fair, I haven't, Anomalisa is the one big work of his that I haven't seen yet, so I can't really speak with authority about that. But then I'm thinking of Ending Things, that one, which I've got to come back to, because that I saw it when it came out, but that was during peak COVID.
That's the thing. That's a tough one to watch during peak COVID, which is
Very
also
much.
when I watched it. And I do think I would like it more rewatching it now. That was a tough watch for me, just because I think many of us were in a dark place, and that's a pretty dark movie. And I don't think they could have anticipated the environment it was going to be released in.
Yeah, and that, like, I think that, to be clear, I think I'm thinking of Ending Things. I thought it was a really good movie, but there's this vibe in both that and Synecdoche, where it's like, if there is a purgatory, this must be what it feels like.
Totally.
Yeah, I feel like those movies are maybe the most vivid depictions of a possible purgatory that maybe ever set to film.
Totally.
And maybe Charlie Kaufman just gets more cynical as he gets older. But thinking a little bit more about the presence of Donald in Adaptation, I mean, something I actually quite like about that character, and you see some of this in the Orlean LaRoche relationship too, is that there is like this sense of the ego character kind of looking down at the id character at first. Like we got to remember those notes that Susan Orlean takes about John LaRoche.
Van
in the van.
Smells funny.
Smells
Delusions
funny.
of grandeur.
Yep.
Exactly. But then after LaRoche says his quote, and this is one of my favorite quotes from the whole movie, about he loves plants because they're so mutable, and that adaptation is a profound process. I think that really moves something in her. And from then on, she's more taken with him in a sincere way. And then, with something I like about how Donald is portrayed too, is that even if, he's more impulsive than Charlie, and, perhaps the kind of screenwriting he is interested in is less, in theory, sophisticated, that he is sincere about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that I think the movie understands very well that, different levels of sophistication do not necessarily indicate varying levels of sincerity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, are we ready to shout out some of our favorite little details from this movie?
Oh, yes.
Let's go.
Sounds like you've got something, Michaela.
I have two. One is, speaking of like LaRoche quotes, this is just a really incredible bit of screenwriting that I loved. So Susan, as they're wading through the swamp and looking for the orchid, she goes, "Can I ask you a personal question?" And John goes, "Look, we're not lost." And I was like,
I love that
that's
part,
so good. That's just so fucking good. Because it could be
and you
interpreted
never
two ways.
even get her question.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
He doesn't let her get to it.
No.
But
Yeah.
I like that it's like, "Can I ask you a personal question?" No, we're not lost. It's like, so there's this insinuation that the personal question is, are you lost? And I liked that. And then there was another bit, which is a bit more crass. When he's in the agent's office, the agent keeps saying like, "I'll fuck her up the ass. I'll do this up the ass, da da da." And around him are like, there's a football positioned vertically and other objects that all look like butt plugs. And I don't know if any of you noticed that, but I lost
I noticed
my
the
shit.
football. I did not notice the others.
I
but
noticed the
now
football,
wanna
but
go
didn't
back and
interpret
look.
it that way.
I think I did notice them, but not go that far in my mind with them.
It could not be intentional. It's just that sometimes Kaufman does do this, and you just kind of have to like let it happen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
totally.
I'm with you on that.
One of my favorite moments, I guess, maybe be the wrong word. One of my favorite details is we talked about the last act becomes a thriller, and the score completely changes at this point. Like Carter Burwell's score through a lot of this film is a little sparse. I think a lot of times when you're in the world with like Susan and LaRoche, and particularly when they're in the swamp, then there's a particular theme that kind of reoccurs. But the last act, like once they're chasing and then they're back in the swamp and they're, being chased by LaRoche and Susan, that's when the score is completely different than it is anywhere else in the film. And it's more of a traditional thriller score. And I just think that's kind of genius.
Yeah.
Totally.
Carter Burwell is very unassumingly like a great chameleon when it comes to how he scores films. Because I think his scores are not always the most like snappy. They don't like pop out at you. But if you're listening for them, there's some like really, really clever stuff in them. Like I just recently rewatched Burn After Reading, and it's like it feels like his score for that is so in dialogue with like 70s paranoia thriller scores, like the way the vibraphone is used in it. And it's just, shout out Carter Burwell.
For sure.
Yeah. One of my favorite cuts in this movie is when he's like talking about how he wants to start the movie. It's like the dawn of time and there's single-celled organisms and all that stuff.
Love this.
And he's
I wrote
speaking
this down too.
Yeah.
And he's speaking into the tape recorder. And I just absolutely love the cut that has to come like maybe a few hours later. And he looks absolutely like inspirationless as he's listening to himself back. Just like one of the biggest laughs at just a fantastic editing choice. I absolutely love. And then another thing that jumps out to me that I really love is these really small but hilarious acting moments that are also like so well delivered that they've stuck with me since I was a teenager, which is Donald puts McKee's 10 Commandments above Charlie's writing space. And then Charlie goes and he crumples it up. And then he stands in the corner and he goes, you shouldn't have done that. And then he sounds like he's really hurt.
And he's like lit in a terrifying way.
Yeah, exactly. And he goes in the most like sincere way because it's extremely helpful. And it's like the way that he just flips and like cannot stay in the dark is to me is like just like a really sweet acting choice. And then the other one for me, and this just has always made me laugh so hard, is in the swamp at the end when LaRoche has been attacked by the alligator and is dead and Meryl Streep is holding him. The way that I first understood that this was absolutely a figment of this guy's imagination is the way all she can talk about is how he's fat. And the way she screams, you fat fuck, in the swamp. This is probably the thing that comes to mind when I think about how good of an actress she is how much of herself she threw into that moment. She's done a lot of great things, but this is like in the top 5 for me. The way she delivers that line.
Yeah. Well, it's, speaking of characters being reduced to pure id.
Yes.
Great moment of that. Yeah. I often think of LaRoche's death in this movie. It's kind of, there's a little bit about him that makes me think of Quint in Jaws. And I feel like that the ending that he reaches is certainly like that too, where it's kind of like, yes, he's gone, but he was like kind of in the area where he loved to be.
Yeah.
And
it's like, this was kind of inevitable.
Yeah.
And they set it up with the alligators before. Like
totally.
the movie's smart about that. It does a lot of little things to cue you in.
Yeah. You've got Chekhov's gun and Kaufman's alligators.
Right.
But yeah, I have a few little details that I'll finish this off with. And so I love the way that the first scene where Donald is present in the story, that his opening dialogue to Charlie is a lot like Charlie's opening narration, where he goes, Charles, is that you? Did you eat lunch? I had that shrimp cocktail in the fridge. Was it yours? I hope not. I couldn't remember, so I ate it. Maybe we should put our names on our food items from now on. What do you think? So it's like the banal form of all these existential thoughts that Charlie's having at the beginning of the movie. Then there's one scene I really love with them where I think it's their third scene together overall, where they start to really get candid about specific screenwriting devices. And then when Donald talks about this idea of having multiple personality disorders in the script that becomes the 3, Charlie goes, the only idea more overused than serial killers is multiple personality. And on top of that, you explore the idea that cop and criminal are 2 parts of the same personality. See every cop movie ever made for other examples. And I just love the irony that he's criticizing split personality despite the fact that he's written 2 different versions of ostensibly himself there.
A wink to the audience for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, in that same scene later on, he says, how could you have someone held prisoner in a basement and working at a police station at the same time? Donald goes, trick photography.
Yeah.
Go figure.
That's a good
yes.
laugh. Yeah.
And then, this is maybe a little less clever as much as just kind of endearing. But then, after Charlie concedes and says like, okay, this is psychologically taught, as their mom put it, and compares it to Brian De Palma's Dress to Kill, then Donald goes, cool, I really like Dress to Kill until the third act denouement. That's not how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last little detail before we move on. Well, I just like this little bit of development for John LaRoche that in one of those scenes in the van, he's being asked by Susan Orlean about his prior obsessions, and he says that he was into turtles, and then he had a phase where he was into fossils, and then Dutch mirrors. Apparently, that made a magazine, and then
and he's like, you remember from that magazine article, right? You read it, right?
I've got a copy around here somewhere.
Yeah. And he's like,
and also
his eyes off the road for a comically long period of time. Yeah.
And then he had a phase of tropical fish too before he was like, fuck fish.
Yeah.
Fuck fish.
Yeah.
That's how much fuck fish.
That's how much fuck fish.
Yeah. And we have to acknowledge too the parallelism of one of the most tragic moments in LaRoche's story is, when we learn how his mother died in the car crash. And then later on, as Charlie and Donald are trying to make their escape from the swamp, that Donald dies also as the result of a car crash.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. I think that car crash is like one of the most intense things I've ever seen in a movie. Like the way it's shot is like still, ever since I was a teenager, I'm like, there is no car crash that makes me more afraid to be in a car crash than the one that I see in Adaptation.
Yeah. Just it speaks to Spike Jonze's talent with, despite the fact that this is such a talky existential movie, that there are some really snappy moments of action in his style of direction.
Well, he came up famously as a skateboard photographer. He's helmed, I think, 3 or 4 of the most revered and iconic skate videos, like Video Days and Yeah Right and Fully Flared. So he has a deep background in getting very primal and very irreverent stuff and capturing that really, really well. And Jackass, all the stuff he's done with he's a real one of one. Spike Jonze, very cool.
Absolutely.
Cool.
Well, are we ready to share some unlikely universes?
Let's do it.
Who would like to start?
Michaela, you have one for Nick Cage, right?
Yes. So Charlie, following Donald's death, does improve his outlook on the creative arts. He goes on to not only write in, but also star in several movies of varying quality, and, takes a stint at writing, directing, all of that, but starts to find his niche until one day the gigs just dry up, and he's got a family now, but he's losing touch with them, and he realizes that he could take on a new role. Unfortunately, that new role and the new script that he could take on involves getting wrapped up in a potential drug ring and CIA conspiracy while writing a film with the suspect of said conspiracy. And then this story ends with a quite meta pan out to the final gunfight, knife fight being played in a movie theater. Does anyone want to guess the film?
Well, it sounded for a moment like The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to guess. I've not seen it, but that's what I thought it was going to be. Very fun.
Yeah. It's, from one meta thing to another.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Love it. That's great.
This is assuming that Charlie Kaufman takes on the persona of Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, that's what makes this movie difficult.
It
because
does.
These are based on real people.
There are layers to this. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. So when Charlie shoots his shot with the perky waitress at the restaurant he frequents, it's a swing and a miss. But it becomes an important moment in the life of this server who, while not really feeling the Orchid expert's vibe, comes away from the encounter realizing that she has some seductive charm. Shortly after turning this guy down, she happens upon a different restaurant patron, a businessman named George. Recognizing his desirable wealth and status, this waitress tries out her moves on him, and much to her delight, he is charmed by her too. So much so, in fact, that he hires her to be his assistant at his real estate development company, the Bluth Company. George rather quickly begins an affair with his new hire, who goes by the name Kitty, and their relationship becomes surprisingly intimate, so much so that George begins divulging information to her about his dealings overseas. When George is arrested, that information will become the basis of extortion when George's son, Michael, steps in to try to keep the company afloat. Kitty is a bit aloof but resolute in her attempts to be a thorn in the side of the Bluth brothers. though she has something of a soft spot for Job, Michael's older brother, and can't quite keep her libido in check. And if there's one thing that Charlie's fantasies got right about Kitty, it's her propensity for removing her shirt to reveal what's underneath as a power move. And perhaps Charlie was lucky to not be on the receiving end of what Kitty would say in conjunction with this act. Say goodbye to these because this is the last time you're gonna see them.
Excellent.
Yeah, that's
I haven't
so
seen
good.
very much of Arrested Development, but well done.
Yes.
Arrested Development, yes.
Yep.
While we were watching this and her scene comes on, Dougie is like, Arrested Development is so weird for trying to convince us that this woman is not attractive.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I know. They really try to go full like librarian on her, and you're like,
Yeah.
no, she's a very attractive person. But yes, Judy Greer plays the waitress of affection, or the object of affection waitress in Adaptation. And Kitty Sanchez, by the way, I love that last name in Arrested Development.
Cool.
Excellent.
Could I follow this up?
Go for it.
Okay. I hope the real Susan Orlean likes this one. In what we know of Susan Orlean's life as a journalist, she's clearly searching for renewed purpose in her mid-career, and for some time finds that with John LaRoche. When her involvement with LaRoche is brought to a tragic end, on top of the drug-infused detour in her personal life that preceded it, Susan experiences a major wake-up call and resolves to stop stepping out on her existing marriage and get her act together on the home front. What we haven't learned about her previously is that not only is she married, but she and her husband have been raising twin girls, adding weight to the tragedy around John LaRoche when she realizes that Charlie Kaufman had lost his own twin brother in the mix-up. Deeply affected by these collected events, Susan also soon finds, in the words of John LaRoche, her one thing that keeps her going. After years of unglamorous journalistic integrity, she experiments, and she's had her hair praised by one of LaRoche's collaborators. She experiments with a glow-up by trimming it a little shorter and letting it go gray. And we also know that she can criticize someone who she thinks is a fat fuck, and thus she finds a passion for fashion, making a lateral or perhaps more of a diagonal move upwards in the world of journalism. She speedily rises through the ranks of a magazine called Runway and insists that from now on, she will be addressed professionally as Miranda Priestley, keeping up with the heavy demands of the fashion industry and perhaps effectively running away from her trauma. By doing so, Miranda Priestley runs an extraordinarily tight ship as Runway's editor-in-chief, challenged only occasionally by certain characters in her rotating cast of assistants, known as the Emilys, particularly one by the real name of Andy Sachs, whose commitment to journalistic principle reminds Miranda deep down of certain episodes from her past. Though as Miranda, she has strayed far away from her former self as Susan Orlean, John LaRoche might be proud of the path she has paved for herself, as the journey from Susan to Miranda proved to be another example of the wheel of the world bringing another living creature through the process of adaptation.
Oh,
Nice.
Very
brilliant.
nice.
Thank
Double
you.
Where's
I-
Prada.
Very fun.
I had to do
Yes.
that one. It just felt like the right year to do it.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also just journalism, Meryl Streep.
Sure.
Also, that
yeah.
Devil
It
Wears
was right
Prada was
there.
a book.
Yeah,
That's true.
Adapted.
another adaptation. Very well done.
Absolutely.
Well, I can round us out. I went TV for this one. So, Ranger Tony confronts LaRoche and his accomplices while they are attempting to remove several rare orchids and other plants from the Fakahatchee Strand State Preserve in southern Florida. Tony seems taken aback by LaRoche's brazenness and seems reluctant to call the authorities. Perhaps this is also because he's not actually a park ranger and is impersonating one while investigating strange goings-on in the area. You see, Ranger Tony is actually a skilled hunter of supernatural beings, a profession he was called to after his wife was possessed by a demon many years earlier. The life of a hunter comes with much grief and tragedy, but he's also built a community of others who know of these underground secrets. One such relationship he has built is with a single father and his two sons, who were similarly thrust into this dark world when their wife/mother was killed by a mysterious being. Tony, or Bobby, as he is actually known, became somewhat of a surrogate parent for these two boys while their birth father was out seeking revenge on the monster that killed his wife. This leads to tension between him and his friend, which causes them to become estranged and Bobby to head out as a hunter on his own. Years later, he hears rumors of mysterious killings in southern Florida, which leads him to impersonate a park ranger at the Fakachi Strand State Preserve in the events of this film. When he spots a suspicious group of men leaving the swamp with pillowcases full of plants, his alarm bells go off. Could these men be involved in the mysterious killings he's here to investigate, or even be fantastical monsters themselves? Bobby, impersonating Ranger Tony, has a responsibility to find out, and he confronts LaRoche and his associates. After the police take over, he determines that this group is not responsible for the killings and continues on with his investigation. Many years later, the boys that he served as a father figure to track him down when their own father goes missing. He uses his honed hunting skills to help the boys find their father, but Bobby and the brothers may turn out to be up against darker forces than they were prepared to confront.
Wow. I don't know this one at all.
Same.
Yeah.
This is a new one for me.
This is television, and this is the television show Supernatural.
Oh,
All right.
God.
Jim Beaver's the actor, right?
Jim Beaver's the actor. I was like, I find it unlikely that Emilio or Julian has seen this show. And I was like, maybe Michaela has. I don't know.
I just know that the fandom's crazy.
They're insane. And I watch this show also has like 15 seasons or some crazy amount.
Oh, wow.
And I did not watch all of it. I watched maybe the first 6 or 7 seasons before I fell off of it. But Jim Beavers, that's, I'd say, probably the role that he is best known for. He's very central to that show, and I think gives like a pretty solid performance in it. And he is a small role in this movie, but is one of the few that is actually a fictional character, as far as I know, and not based on a real person.
Nice, which makes it a little
Nicely
cleaner
done.
for what we're doing.
Yeah.
Potentially.
I thought for sure you were going to connect Maggie Gyllenhaal to Cecil B. Demented.
I definitely thought about it because I've done
Yeah.
that before, but I figured I'd zag a little on this one.
Yeah. She
All right,
she
well,
is like
well
in the filmmaking crew of that bunch, isn't she?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
being a
true.
makeup artist,
Yeah,
natural
it'd be
progression
a very
right
easy
there.
one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Well, at least we've acknowledged. So any closing thoughts about adaptation?
I mean, like, obviously I didn't want to brag too much about the whole writing stuff on this podcast, but like, I do feel like it will be something I continue to revisit. Hopefully my writing career doesn't stall here, knocking on my wooden desk here. Because
I'll knock for
I've-
you too on mine.
thank you. I
Same.
want to keep
Same.
creating things, and I want to keep wrestling with the dilemmas that he presents in this film. And so I feel like it's going to be one of these movies that I keep coming back to, which I think is the best you can ask for in a movie.
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think I'm like I bought a Blu-ray of the movie before we covered it for this episode. I will absolutely happily watch it again. I think that I see Emilio's got his too.
I still have this from 2003.
Oh, sweet. I guess it's a DVD if it's that
It
old.
is a DVD. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like I understand how there can be skeptical opinions about some aspects of this movie, but I don't share them. But I think, we all have a little bit of a Charlie and a Donald Kaufman in us, and it's about letting them exist in harmony with one another. I think he's had a great career. In my mind, this might be maybe Nicolas Cage's best performance. It's certainly one of them because he's, interestingly grounded. If you want to see another performance of his that's a little like it, I recommend Dream Scenario, pretty similar. And, in a different WTF episode, Ron Livingston said that he thought the screenplay for Adaptation might be the greatest ever written. And I don't know if I've gotten to the place where I think it is head and shoulders above everything else yet, but I do certainly think it is one of the great screenplays. It's got such a great balance of what is clever and what is sincere. And yeah, I will happily keep revisiting it in many future viewings.
I had a great time revisiting this, and I think it's my favorite Kaufman. And that's all I'll say. It was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say coming back to it, I know I've already said this a couple times. I was surprised at some of the criticisms that jumped out to me a little bit. But overall, I think the magic of this movie very much still works on me. I think at its worst, it feels overly self-indulgent to me. But I also think the movie doesn't try to be anything that it isn't. The movie knows what it is. And if you know what it is, then you roll with that. So yeah, there's a hidden message in this movie that I really like. And I don't know how true or necessarily good it is to believe this, but it's nonetheless something that is deeply satisfying to a cinephile. And that is, if real life ever gets too static for you, or you start to get depressed, or you feel stuck, imagine that you're in a movie. Like, how would you want to appear? How do you want to grow? What's that first step? And I think creating parameters for yourself like that is actually really interesting. And I think that the tried and true rules that govern satisfying movies can in some ways give you clarity and vision and satisfaction in life as well. I think it's one of the things that I love so much about art. I think it's why I consider, my favorite art and favorite fictional characters when I have decisions to make myself, and ultimately why I think this movie resonates with me. Like, I think there is like a tenuous optimism in this movie that I've already talked about. Like, I feel a little conflicted about, but I also can deeply relate to the feeling of optimism, but only for brief moments amidst a general state of unease and uncertainty. So yeah, like a really interesting rewatch. I know I will rewatch this movie again. It will always be something interesting.
Well said. Yeah. Well, Michaela, it's always an immense pleasure having you along for one of these many rides that we take.
Totally.
Where can listeners find you and your work?
So I talked a lot about my writing on this episode. I do little promos of the poetry book and what a friend did call Kaufman-esque things, where I try to promote myself and then start to eat myself alive. But it's not very influencer friendly, and that is all on my writing Instagram at Leatrice. So that's like Beatrice but with an L _write. So WIRTE. So that's the writing account. My drag account is at Jill, the letter N, Jeff 11. So it's Jill and Jeff, and that's all one word. And that's, I play a drag king and a drag queen, and I mostly perform in the UK, but I do visit New York for Christmas and things. So I do like to perform in New York City as well. And in general, if you like poems about heartbreak and also the persistence of memory and that human relationships never truly die, you can head on to Barnes & Noble and get Yearbook Signing. That's the name of the book. It's Yearbook Signing. And if I ever meet you in real life, I will sign it. There's a signature page at the back, like a high school yearbook. And the idea is that you ask people to sign and you collect your own signatures of people that impacted you. So I would happily sign it, because I could show my copy, which is littered with other people's signatures. And hopefully I'll be at another episode of this sometime in the future, because I always really enjoy doing it. Thank you again for having me on, guys.
Hey, the pleasure's all ours.
Totally.
Yeah,
Thanks for being along for the ride.
Definitely.
I will get that signature from you the next time I see you.
Yes.
Can I say one last quick thing? I do want to thank Idris. I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys. Idris literally rewatched this movie last night in order to...
Thank you, Idris.
Yeah. I just want to take a moment to say thank you, because this was a request that came literally from like a 2-minute conversation that we had back and forth about a year ago. And Idris is just that much of a mensch that he was like, all right, I will give you guys what you want. So a huge shout out to him. He's got, his many projects in the mix, amongst them King of the Neuroverse, which we've talked a little bit about. And if you want to go back and hear him speak a little bit more about that, go to our Bamboozled episode and check out what he has to say there.
Yeah, and he also
100%.
joined us to talk Wag the Dog about 2 years ago. That was a great episode as well. Whatever differences in opinion we may have about adaptation, really got to love that he actually took the time to watch the movie just to make this contribution. So thank you, Idris.
Yeah.
Hope you're doing well.
Yeah, 100%. And the next time you hear us, we will be continuing this cycle on Twins and Doppelgangers by discussing a mise en scene, a movie none of us have seen before. And that film will be Cloud Atlas, released in 2012, directed by Lily and Lana Wachowski and Tim Tykwer. I think we have agreed is how we pronounce it, based on the 2004 novel by David Mitchell, and starring a million different people. Including Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, Jim Broadbent, Hugo Weaving, and a bunch of others. I'll stop there for time's sake. But check out next week's episode to hear the entire list.
Yes. Yeah, Michaela, you seem to react to that.
I read the book in high school in time to see the movie. My love for the movie has not aged, but I still love the book.
I am very curious to read the book now. Dougie's read the book and he loved it. So I'm definitely going to add it to my list.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thanks for your brief testimony on that, Michaela. And in addition to this podcast, you can also follow us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Sleepless Cinematic Pod. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter at sleeplesscinematicpod.substack.com. And of course, you can contact us via email. We would love to hear from you at sleeplesscinematicpod@gmail.com. If you're on Letterboxd, you can follow me, Julian, at Julian_Barthold.
And you can follow me, Madeline, at Patroness of Cats. If you are listening to us for the first time, thank you for finding us. If this is the 7th or 8th or 80th time you've listened to us, thank you for sticking with us. We have really grown to love doing this, and it means the world to have our budding listenership grow.
And if you haven't already, we'd ask you, return listener, to please write a positive review and rate us on your podcast platform of choice. This is one of the best ways for new listeners to find us and help our podcast take its next steps. You can also keep it grassroots. You can tell a friend to tell a friend about the Sleepless Cinematic Podcast, because that helps too.
And despite the nature of our audio-based format, God help you if you ever use voiceover in your work, my friends.